So I think we can all agree that the cameras on smartphones have continued to get better and better with time at a rather impressive, kind of honestly, kind of crazy rate. And this is despite the fact that when you put a camera on the back of a phone, you are restricted in a lot of different ways, right? You have to make sure that this thing is very small. Now, we've seen in recent years, the sensors on cameras get bigger and bigger and bigger. But one of the things that really can't get too much bigger is the actual glass, the lenses. Now, we've also seen solutions to this, kind of solutions to this. This camera has a periscope telephoto lens. Basically, what happens is light goes in, hits a mirror, and then goes down, or it goes in another direction. It doesn't continue going this way. It goes into the body of the phone, and that's because it needs to pass through a whole bunch of lenses to be able to zoom 5 times optically like it does. We're finding all these like really creative and strange ways to compensate for the fact that we're squeezing hardware into these phones where it really doesn't belong. Now we've got quote unquote 1-inch sensors, which are not actually 1 inch across, but very large sensors in smartphones as well. Sony has theirs, and there's several phones that have used that. The Xiaomi 12S Ultra, of course, famously using a 1-inch sensor. I'm driving at something very specific here. We're trying to squeeze full-blown camera hardware into really, really small spaces, and eventually, there's only so much that you can do. Well, I have a concept video to show to you guys today. A concept video that involves that Xiaomi 12S Ultra and tries to get around that problem in a very novel and creative way that's reminiscent, perhaps, of something that we have seen in the past from Samsung, something we've seen in the past from Motorola, but maybe taking it one step further. Let's stroll down memory lane here very quickly, though, before we do that. Let's look at the Samsung Galaxy S4 Zoom. This is basically Samsung's very early attempt at making something really interesting in terms of a photographic centered phone, kind of. Basically, this is take some phone hardware and slap a full-fledged camera on the back. It ran Android. So the idea was you had like a really good camera that could zoom into all these things and take a photo and then go straight to Instagram or whatever and share it from there. This was sort of a novel idea at that point, and I think that it's still really interesting. This is something I've thought about, like some of the modern DSLRs, like I'm filming on this Sony camera here right now. Why doesn't it run Android? Like, how easy would that be to then be able to throw your photo into an editing app like Pixlr or Snapseed, share it to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook right from the camera? It's something that I've definitely thought about. And Samsung clearly thought about this a long time ago. Now, of course, I'm sure that the photos were better than the average phone, but it wasn't like incredibly, incredibly better than what we were already getting. The Zoom was probably very impressive, and it just didn't do very well. Nobody really bought the thing. Hell, for $16, I might buy one myself just to test. Another instance, though, for Motorola. This thing is called the Hasselblad Moto Mod, and you had a pretty normal-looking phone, a very, very, very thin phone that was magnetic and had these pogo connectors. You snap this camera module onto the back, and you could do the same thing. Zoom. You have basically the same experience as this S4 Zoom, but you could take the thing off and use it like a normal phone. Xiaomi is coming at this with this concept in a novel way, in a different sort of way. It's similar, but also different. Let's let this roll forward and see what this looks like. What we have here is the Xiaomi 12S Ultra, and if we roll back just a little bit here, you will see that they are attaching this little circular thing to the already very large circular camera bump on the back of the 12S Ultra. You have to think of this as something that they were thinking about when they made this round camera bump. They attach this thing on, and then to that, they attach a full, proper lens like you would use on a normal camera onto this 12S Ultra. And you can see they're adjusting the aperture there. This is a full-blown lens on a 12S Ultra. And like I've already said, that lens, the glass, is one of the biggest thing that holds back modern smartphones because it has to be very small, very thin. A lens on a proper DSLR, you know how big those things are. They're really, really big. So that is definitely a place where we're being held back. And Xiaomi said, well, what if we took our, top flight hardware on a smartphone, and we got rid of that constraint of a tiny little low quality lens by attaching whatever lens effectively you want to this thing. You'll actually see here in a moment, they're attaching different lenses. And if you're a photographer, you probably have in your bag a couple of different lenses, ones that are going to be more zoom, one for portrait, for that bokeh look in the background. There's all sorts of lenses you could potentially use on this thing, and that's what they're showing here. Maybe it's not fully universal, but they're attaching all kinds of different lenses. And yes, this is not the greatest of quality, but you can see here what we're getting at, okay? Like, this is a proper portrait, and this is not something being done with portrait mode. This is being done with a lens that will give you a shallow depth of field. You've got a large sensor and you have a camera lens now that's going to give you an aperture that is appropriate for a portrait. And I mean, look, it's pretty obvious what you're seeing here is potentially a step above what you get from doing this in software. Doing this in hardware is always going to be better than doing it in software. You're going to have a more consistent look to the results. Now, eagle-eyed viewers among you may have noticed that something looks very different here with this 12S Ultra. Look at the middle camera there. See how it's square? Let's look at what the 12S Ultra looked like when it came out, right? It's round in the middle. That is a different looking setup. And that's because this is not just the 12S Ultra. This thing has been modified to work better with this. Obviously, you need a thing to attach around that ring. They needed to reinforce that ring. And so there's more to this. And if you can kind of read down here, we'll go bigger here so that you can read this. But basically what he's talking about here, the key to achieve all of these is a secondary 1-inch sensor, which can receive light directly. Unlike previous smartphone lens accessories, it gives up the original lens of the smartphone and captures light directly from the external lens. So I may not be totally understanding this because I'm not an expert in this stuff, but I think one of the biggest problems with prior phones that were using a 1-inch sensor is that, great, the sensor is really big, but the lens is not big enough to be using all of the sensor. I think what they're saying here is that by redoing this a little bit, that 1-inch sensor is being fully utilized by this new lens setup. So it's going to be not just better because the lens is better, but better because it's actually using the full sensor. Now, he goes on to talk about some of the changes that were made here, right? Some of the reinforcements that I just kind of talked about to make this thing work. It is basically an M mount from what they're saying here in this video. So they had to make sure this thing can actually hold that lens in place, whatever lens you're going to be putting on there, that it actually needs to be rigid enough for that to be okay. They also talk here in a moment about some of the software that they're going to use. They show focus peaking in this sort of pro mode, histogram, all kinds of like pro photography things, 10-bit RAW being a possibility on this as well. This is a really, really interesting concept. Now, it's unclear to me if this is something that they're actually going to try and sell at any point or if this is going to only remain a concept, but I think that the concept is quite strong because you've got something that, you know, like I said earlier, the advantages of something like this running Android to me, I think are quite obvious. You have something that can take really nice pictures, edit on the phone, and then share right there from the phone. Do whatever you want, all from the phone. You don't have to, you know, some photographers I know have an iPad or something, and they move it to the iPad and quickly view things there and do things with it there. You wouldn't really need to do any of that. You could just do it all straight from the phone, and I think that there is a possibility of a future where you have a really decent camera on your phone that's fine, and then if you want to, you maybe magnetically or with some sort of M mount, you clip on a proper lens and take like unbelievably good photos from the very same hardware. Who knows, maybe it'll only just be a concept for the rest of time, but perhaps it will at one point be more than just a concept. Guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you on the next one, and until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.